Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. I am Courtney Machi. I'm the VP of Product and Engineering at Andela. I'm thrilled to be your host for today's live stream. Today, we are going to talk about leveraging open talent and AI to scale the enterprise workforce. And I'm so pleased to have John Winsor, the author of Open Talent and the founder and CEO of Open Assembly, here with us today. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Courtney. Really excited to be here and always impressed, with all the great things you guys are doing at Andela. Besides the work I've been doing and the book I wrote, I'm now executive fellow at the Digital Design and Data Institute at Harvard. We're really exploring the future of work, AI, and open talent. Kind of how does talent fit into this new world of work in the context of AI? So really excited to sit down with you today and talk about some of the latest research and some of the observations we're making.
Awesome. Thank you for that. We are very excited to dive in. Before we do that, I will quickly cover some housekeeping items. So first things first, we are live streaming. We've got guests from all over the world. Please introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're listening from. Drop any questions that you have in the chat. We do want to keep this conversation as interactive as we can. We'll definitely answer questions at the end of the conversation as well. Second, a recording will be available on LinkedIn and YouTube after today's live event. So if you've got to drop early, no worries, we got you. You can also share this out. And finally, if you want to learn more about Andela or the content we are presenting today, you can go to andela.com/resources and learn more. I also want to tell you just a little bit about Andela. We are one of the largest and most diverse private talent marketplaces in the world. What that means is that all of the technologists available for hire on Andela are vetted before joining our marketplace. We've got more than 150,000 technologists in 135 countries. 60% of those technologists come from markets such as Africa and Latin America. Our platform, Andela Talent Cloud, makes it super easy to connect with these amazing technologists and streamlines the hiring lifecycle. In fact, Andela clients experience a 66% increase in speed to hire, 33% faster project delivery when working with Andela, and overall 97% ROI. We're really excited about that data. It's from our recent Forrester Total Economic Impact Survey. As I mentioned, if you want to learn more about any of that or just Andela in general, you can go to andela.com. All right. With that, let's get to it. So John, we talked a little bit already about this book, Open Talent, that you published. I think our listeners would love to hear a little more just about the premise of the book and some of the key insights that you uncovered as you were researching that book.
Yeah. Thanks, Courtney. It's been a long journey. I've been 25 years I've been in the space. I started in my journey kind of an open talent. We used to call it crowdsourcing back in the day, but just getting variable cost tools together, just trying to figure out how to build companies that are much more profitable and fast. I was always a bootstrap entrepreneur, so using that, and so that journey took me to sell some companies or sell a company to Havas out of France, and became chief innovation officer. And then I ended up at Harvard at the Laboratory of Innovation Sciences at Harvard. And one of the things we were studying, one of the things I found so fascinating is that LISH, of the Laboratory for Innovation Science at Harvard, had actually built all the variable cost tools at NASA. And one of the things that really struck me is that, as we talk about the book in the context of a new mindset shift that we need to have around variable cost labor, was that, you could really see NASA as two different things. And there was a real divide inside NASA when we did the research. One was a traditional organization that's 17,000 world-class employees that are doing really innovative stuff. That's one way to view it. The other way to view it, and the one that I really got excited about, was that because of the tools we built from LISH and the Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation, NASA was able to connect their 17,000 really amazing employees to 30,000 contractors through an internal talent marketplace called NASA at Work, and then to 200 million people through 40 platforms through their Center of Excellence for Collaborative Innovation. So if you took a networked organizational mindset that we really recommend in the book, then NASA really has the ability to tap into 200 million, 47,000 people to work on their behalf. And the question I always ask executives is, which would you rather have, 17,000 employees or the ability to tap in seamlessly into 200,047,000 people. And obviously NASA's work has proven to be really powerful, lots of great solutions, but that was really the core insight for the book. One of the things we wanted to do is we've seen great platforms like Andela that are really done a great job of building the right technology to capture and tap into this kind of new set of talent that's in a compliant and secure way. But the ability to really tap into that adjacent knowledge, that new knowledge that's outside the realm that people have inside, and really some of the issues. So the goal really of the book was to create common language and common process around that. And really, we have a step-by-step methodology, starting with that story of NASA, of the networked organization. How do we do that? And how do we step-by-step create this kind of ecosystem of talent?
Really interesting. And I want to dive into the NASA example and talk a little bit about change management. So NASA was an early adopter of this
Right.
model, right? And companies adopt new things early, usually because they have a deep need for something, but also because they become open to the change, which is really hard. Um,
Very.
so it's so hard. Can you talk a little bit about like the patterns you've seen there with some of these early adopters? So like what prompted them to move towards the change? How did they become open to it? And what things did they do really well early on in order to be successful with these new models?
That's such a great question, because I think, I think we have to bifurcate the kind of transformations we're talking about, right? So if we talk about kind of tactical transformation, what we're seeing is this kind of long trend towards the democratization of expertise and knowledge, right? We have the internet, we have the iPhone, obviously talent platforms, and we're seeing that right through kind of Gen AI now. And it's certainly an accelerant was the pandemic. This idea that, a paradigm shift, like, oh, nobody can work remote, to, oh, everybody has to work remote. So all these are factors in this kind of new world of work and new world of talent. I think one of the things that we see from an adoption standpoint is that so far it's been very much of a bottom up, so if we think
Yeah.
about some of these things as tactical innovations, right, that they're the ones that the companies can kind of absorb. We can use, distributed tools. We can use SaaS platforms via, the network, internet. Yet some of these bigger things like strategic transformations, and I would say open talent, and certainly Gen AI is another strategic, innovation or transformation. So in both cases, what we're seeing is very much bottom up, acceptance and adoption versus top down. Top down's been very difficult because
Hmm.
for both of these things, both open talent and Gen AI, it's really hard for companies to rethink. They have to remake the organization. And what we've observed is so many organizations have been built in the industrial era, right? This age of like trying to bring together massive amounts of resources to get something done. And in this new digital age, what we're seeing is it's a lot easier to connect with all kinds of variable cost tools and talent to get things done. So what we've seen is the best companies go through a step-by-step process. They think of themselves first as a mindset of a networked organization. They start thinking about, like, how do I build a network culture built on transparency, built on the ability to share different ideas, and for doing it very openly. And then down to, we've got to assess, this kind of step-by-step process, assess where you are. What are you using now? And I think that's been a really difficult thing, right? A lot of companies don't even realize that they're using so much open talent from platforms because the individuals inside those companies are. And so my suggestion always in the assess is really figure out what's really happening inside the organization. How do you empower that? Don't threaten those individuals, right? To say you can't
Hmm.
use those things, but really just, it's a discovery and an empowerment process. And then in kind of a learning phase, like building a center of excellence. It could be just one person. Balaji Bandili, who I was on the phone with earlier, I wrote a great case study with Mike Tushman on Deloitte Pixel, and he was really the champion inside Deloitte to bring these ideas forward. So it doesn't have to be a big, complicated center of excellence, but it needs to start with a learning center. I think that may be even a better way to say, because sometimes using the word, right, center of excellence seems like Bell Labs or something that's really complicated.
Scary.
Right, exactly. So thinking about it more in how do we learn about these? What are the best platforms to connect with? What are their processes? How would we integrate that into our organization? Then we always recommend an experimentation phase. How do we start with small projects that aren't threatening to the overall organization or aren't threatening to teams inside the organization, but we can really judge whether that's successful or it's not successful. Is it additive to what we do? And then the fourth phase is really build. Like, how do we think about building? And we recommend 3 things to build: open innovation capabilities to really bring kind of extraordinary adjacent knowledge that you don't really think about, internal talent marketplaces that allow for companies to connect their internal talent teams and capture the cognitive surplus. And then third, building external talent clouds. And Dell is a great example of that, right? It's like when you look outside the set of, the need to think about things in a new way and build that kind of adjacent knowledge in a really powerful way. What's important is to have a partner to do that. Really, the predominant way of working is either staffing organizations that take a really long time to implement, to get folks to work on your behalf, or doing it yourself and really using independent contractors. And our recommendation is really to think about digitally transforming that process with great platforms like Andela that can really keep things organized and keep the workflow going the right way and being able to replace talent as things move along in a project. But those are the recommendations that we have. And then certainly the last step that we're seeing just a very few companies do yet is this kind of the scaling process.
I love that. Super important insights and really helpful to kind of hear like step by step how you think about it. I want to go back to what you were saying about like the grassroots movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about how a lot of what you see with these open platforms is that, it's bottoms up.
Mm-hmm.
So people and enterprises, they start to use these platforms because they have a need, they have a problem to solve, and things kind of organically grow from there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing something very similar with AI in a lot of cases, and you talked about this a little bit as well. It's starting to kind of proliferate through the organization. People are starting to wonder, what's my strategy? How do I put together a strategy? And you recently conducted some research that you're calling the AI Maturity Index. And I think this is a good segue into just telling our listeners a little bit more about what that is, why you decided to do it, and kind of what you're learning and seeing there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the things we really believe is if you want to know where to go, you got to know where you are, right? And that's the start. So so we created this AI maturity index to give people the ability to understand where they are, like what's happening at the grassroots level. How do we kind of use that to empower? And I'll get into some of the results that we have in a second. I think one of the things that's happened since you and I talked last is a BCG just came out with some new research with they've done some research with 1,400 C-level executives in Fortune 2,000 companies, and some of the things that they found is that 25% of people on the ground, the bottom up, are using AI tools, right? And contrast that with 89% of the companies they surveyed actually have a desire or actually put Gen AI as a top 3 priority. But 90% of the people they surveyed still say they're in the observant mode. So I would say this is very much similar to the open talent adoption, right? It's like tons of people are using it, hiring managers, engineering directors, folks that need to get the work done. But the bigger organization see it as a priority, solving the talent crisis and solving the talent issue. Yet it's really hard for them to make the movement. So if we look at the specific data that we came up with, really, we have so far, it's very early days. We've had about 2,000 participants in the survey. And in that survey, some of the results are, 47% worry that advancements in AI within the next 5 years will cause them to lose their job. And 66% of leaders would not hire someone without some AI skills. And 77% of leaders are more likely to hire a less experienced candidate with AI skills than a more experienced candidate. Like some of the things that we've learned. Oh, sorry. Did you have a question?
No, I just said that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think some of the things from an overview standpoint and the learnings is the learning paths are really unclear, right? The landscape's overwhelming, and people feel overwhelmed with the AI tools, and neither companies or individuals know how to measure their starting point. So, like, where do I start? It's kind of a
Yes.
cold start problem, right? And I think we get caught up in like the latest news. So ChatGPT is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many other tools. And Courtney, you mentioned it right before the call, like every day things are changing, right? It's really crazy. And so it's really the case studies are vary dramatically, and it's really hard to find inspiration, relevance, use cases from kind of to guide these learning experiences so far. My sense is the way this is going to play out is that companies are going to look towards really great partners like Andela to really help them integrate new AI tools. One of the things we've been thinking about at Harvard is really in that external talent cloud, that I talked about earlier in the framework that we talked about. Really, what we'll see, our vision is, at least, and what we're discovering is that we'll see great platforms like Andela really help companies divide the work and taskify the work. If you start instead of with jobs and roles, you start with outcomes and what tasks need to be done, and then what skills somebody needs to have to get those tasks done. Really, you're seeing a bifurcation that great platforms can do between human labor and synthetic labor, and then how do we recombine that? And that's just really over the heads of a lot of companies organizationally. They're going to have to rely on great partners to help solve those problems.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're seeing the same thing. There's a huge need as we kind of enter this next phase of software development.
Yeah.
There's a huge need to upskill, reskill. Um, at Andela, we have a huge investment in learning programs.
Hmm.
We have partnerships with companies like NVIDIA and Udemy. We're also developing our own learning programs around AI specifically. We've got hundreds of talent now kind of trained up through those programs. And of course, we'll continue to do a lot more. But I really think that that is a critical piece of what we need to solve for as we kind of enter this next phase. And it sounds like you're seeing the same.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, if we take our, AI maturity index learnings of the learning paths are really unclear. There's just too many opportunities. And it really gives this cold start problem to organizations. There's so many different ways to use it, and so many different structures, and so many different frameworks. Like, how do we use it? So relying on companies that, are willing to make an investment like you guys that really think about things. I've got an article coming out in Harvard Business Review in the next week or so that really outlines that takes this open talent framework of assess to scale and really is applying it to AI adoption as well. And I think we're just at the beginning, or at least my sense is, talking to some of the experts in the field, of coming up with frameworks that allow for companies to have the confidence that they're going down the right path to learn. But in the meantime, as they build those things out, it's going to take years to do that. They've got to move quicker. And the only way to move quicker is with partners.
100%. Um, on the AI maturity index, so is this something that individuals can leverage for themselves so they can kind of understand where they are in, the grand scheme of things? Can companies leverage the index? Like, what's the roadmap for this?
Yeah, it's both actually. We
Okay.
want everybody to participate because we want to get a sense of what's the overall, audience, what's the overall culture feeling about, their adoption and where we are in the maturity index. And then also companies using that to apply to their teams. And I would suggest applying it not only to your internal teams, but also your external teams. Like, everybody that's involved in the creation of work, where are they, to level set, to see where we are. And also, like we talked about in the open talent framework, it's a learning process, right? It's like you've got to know kind of the tools you need to assess where you are as an organization. And this is just the start of a dialogue to start building those learning paths.
Awesome. Thank you, John. And it looks like we've got the AI maturity index link in the chat for those who are interested in participating. So I want to quickly, you mentioned synthetic labor just
Mm-hmm.
now. Can you talk a little bit about, maybe define it for the audience, talk a little bit about kind of how you see that coming into the fold and kind of driving the next stage of talent platforms and basically future of work, how work gets done?
Right, right. That's a great,
It's a big question,
there's
so
a big question. I know, I
couple
know.
minutes, couple
Yeah.
minutes.
Well, what's funny? I don't
Key
know about
takeaways.
you know what's so interesting to me, and I don't know if you're feeling the same way. Is a couple weeks ago, this word just kind of appeared in culture, agentic, right? The agents, the agentization of AI,
Mhm.
like creating these personas, and what we're seeing. I was just at MIT. At a conference talking about synthetic crowds and synthetic labor. And one of the things that I find really interesting is the ability, or at least the research shows the ability to create agents in these LLMs to start thinking and acting like humans to either ideate or get work done. And so my sense is it's going to give us the ability to scale. One of the things that I think we always have these discussions, right? If you go back to the 1960s, there was this feeling of like, oh, we're going to, this modernization, it's going to give us the ability to work 3 days a week. I mean, most of the time throughout history, these tools have made us way more productive. And it doesn't mean we work less or less people work. It's just the radical growth of productivity per person working the same number of hours, and the amount of output that companies can get done is radically shifted. So I think that what we see, there's a couple things. One is a lot of organizations have a hard time getting out of their own way, right? And one of the things I always think about is who would I want to work with as things change really fast. And what we see in the data is that most organizations give their employees 0.3% of their salary to do job specific tool training, right? Things that can help them accelerate their job. Whereas the average freelancer spends 15% of their time learning new tools. So from my perspective, I would always want to work with freelancers through platforms that are up to speed and the latest tools, that are willing to learn, that I can challenge them as an organization to say, hey, have you tried this? Or how does that work? Knowing that they're going to really, be able to advance that. And so my sense is that we're going to have this world where, or we're coming into this world with AI agents and humans, that there's going to be, we'll find our way in what work humans get done and what work AI accelerates. But it's going to kind of be this superhuman, perspective. One of the things that I think back on fondly is Mike Morris, who's a good friend, who was CEO of Torque. It must have been in 2017. We were giving a speech at SIA, the Staffing Industry Analysts big annual meeting, and he said, imagine a future where it's not that a freelance worker, a freelance software engineer from a platform does the same number of lines of code as your internal team. Like, let's just say 100 lines of code. It's that the freelancer has the latest tools that are provided by the platform and very fast learning cycles. And then that freelancer will be able to do a million lines of code in a day because they know how to use tools like AI. And that was like 6 or 7 years ago, but I think it's coming true, right? I think if you really want to get things done, you've got to work with folks that are really on the cutting edge of how to use these tools to really accelerate your productivity.
100%. And, I think curiosity is a really important trait to have right now as well. You talk about how the average freelancer spends 15% of their time learning new tools. There is just kind of a natural curiosity there, right? And so it's definitely a good time to be leveraging folks with that curiosity. Go ahead, John.
No, I was just going to add, I think one of the things that's really interesting to me is a lot of people choose to be freelancers because of that curiosity, right? They want to work on
Absolutely.
really interesting, hard problems. And I think they felt stifled when we do research on why do you freelance? Why do you want to work, have a portfolio career? It's because, well, I felt really stifled. So much of my day got taken up into meetings that weren't, or tasks that weren't like what I'm passionate about. And now I've unencumbered myself from all that. So I can work on the really cool things, and I can create this learning path and this curiosity path that adds more to every project that I do.
Absolutely. Okay. So we have a couple minutes left. So I'm going to go to my last question for you, John.
Yeah.
And it is the predictions question. So as we wrap up, just final thoughts you want to leave the audience with regarding future of work, AI, open talent landscape, predictions. You have the floor.
Yeah. So, there was a question I see in the chat around managing data and security. And I think that in confidentiality, I think that's a really important thing and probably a good thing to end with. I mean, to me, that the reason to use platforms is that you guys at Andela spend a lot of time thinking about those things, and that's to me the importance of platforms to connect with freelancers. Sure, you can go out and hire folks in a lot of different ways, independent contractors, but figuring that the compliance and security and all those issues is really difficult, especially when in a global perspective. What I imagine, what I'm so excited about is this kind of digital transformation of incumbent organizations. One of the things that, and I'll leave everybody with an analogy. Courtney, if we were in Boston and we were having dinner and I had a speech the next day and I spilled some spaghetti on my sport coat, if it was 2007, what I would do is pull out the yellow pages as we sat at dinner and probably make some calls around to a dry cleaner. But what I didn't realize until I did some research is in 2007, the yellow pages in Boston cost $100 million to produce. So for me to search and match, for me to find a dry cleaner was $100 million of cost. Whereas today, when we look at other markets, right, that's been commoditized. The idea to find a dry cleaner on Google or on Yelp with customer comments that are really recent, and I can have a much better qualified choice. That's happening in talent as well. That's a natural trend. And I think the people that can realize that and be ahead of it and create the systems of the future, like you guys are at Andela, will be the owners of that. Same thing applies with AI and how AI works with humans and how all this stuff goes together to get, the tasks to get the outcomes done. It's important that somebody helps companies through that gauntlet of so many choices and so many different opportunities. So I'd leave it at that.
I love that. That's a great thing to end on. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Courtney.
Okay, we do have a couple more questions. So I'll take the first one. Is there any strategic learning path for AI that you can recommend, John?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I do is I have all 5 of the LLMs up on my computer. And I think the best way to experiment is to just learn. One of the things that Ethan Mollick talks about is that he's just blown away by how many executives he talks to, C-level executives that say, we need an AI strategy. But then when he queries them about using AI themselves, very few have used it. And we're in this kind of really interesting time where it demands that all of us are on this learning path. So that's my recommendation, right? And the way that I use it is I keep all 5 open. I use the same prompts and start experimenting with prompting to do the work that I need to get done.
I do the same exact thing. I'm glad to see that we're aligned there. Okay, what regulatory frameworks or guidelines should businesses follow to ensure responsible and ethical AI deployment? Any thoughts there, John?
Oh man, that's a really great question. It's a complicated world, right? I think we're in that kind of pre-regulatory phase of experimentation. And I think the important thing is, it's hard to have a point of view unless you have deep knowledge about the models. And so I would suggest if somebody has a concern about that they get involved and really dive deeply into the models and figure out how they work. So everybody has a point of view, because that's what's going to take. From my perspective, one of the great, pieces of knowledge and thinking is, what's the mindset? What are the frames that, not just the regulatory frames, but the governing frames, the governing on societal frames, right? Are the right frameworks to think about. And I think Yuval Harari's new book called Nexus, the history of information and networks, is a really, really important starting point to have a collective dialogue. And how do we build the right kinds of governance models and the regulatory processes to deal with stuff?
Yeah, certainly a lot of to-dos there, a lot for all of us to dive into and learn. Cool. So we are pretty much at time. I want to thank everybody for joining. I want to thank John for sharing your expertise and wisdom with us. One last thing I'll share with everybody on the line. We are going to be giving everybody who attended a copy of John's book, Open Talent. So we have your information. We will be in touch on how we're going to get that book to you. But once again, thank you, everybody. It has been a great 30 minutes, quick discussion, lots of great insights, though, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Courtney. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.